Now you want to secure your wire at the base of the fascinator. You want to attach it at the base, and you have to use blanket stitches to do this job. You put your thread underneath the wire, your needle underneath the wire, and then your thread, you pull the thread. You have to do it all around. Make sure the interval between the stitches are fairly even. Now I'm left with a few stitches to go, maybe 3 or 4 more stitches to go. The needle goes under the wire. You make sure it goes underneath the wire first. Comes out at an angle on the other side. And then you wrap your thread around the needle and pull. Sometimes it's difficult to get the needle underneath the wire. So I'm going to put the last couple of stitches and I'll call it a day. The fascinator base is now secure, and you can go ahead with the rest of your projects. The next project is to you wrap your thread around it for the last time and pull. Make sure it's secured. Tie a couple of knots. Then you cut. The fascinator looks very nice, but we have not finished. We need to cover the base with a bias strip, and we are going to learn how to cut a bias strip at the next stage of the project and apply it to the base to cover the edge of the fascinator. It already looks very nice and beautiful. because I used same color thread, it is difficult to find the stitches on the outside of the fascinator. It looks very neat. Now I'm going to show you how you can cut on a bias. This is the same material I used for the fascinator, and this material is called cinnamon. It is a straw material made from the banana tree, mostly comes from the Philippines. Now I'm showing you the straight edges of the material. If you want to cut on a bias, you take the corner of the straight edge and bring it towards you to form a triangle. There you go. And if you want to test to see if you have a bias, you begin to pull on the fold, and you see that already it has stretched. Cutting on the bias helps you to use this material to do a lot of things in millinery. So we are going to cut on a bias. You pull it and you know that you already have a bias, a true bias, and then you cut along the fold. You have to determine what width you need. I have decided I'll use 1 inch width. I have already measured it and steamed ironed it, so I'm going to cut along. So I'm cutting along the edge of the bias. There you go. That's the fold that I have made. Now I have the bias in my hand, and if you open it, you will see that I have folded it into 2. So the total width is 1 inch. 2 inches, sorry, but it's 1 inch on each side, The next thing you do is to fold the rough edges of the bias inwards towards the middle line. You fold both edges in, the rough edges, but you make sure that you leave room between the line and the rough edge that is folded in, if you understand what I'm saying. What I'm trying to say is that don't fold it all the way to touch the middle line inside. Just leave room between the middle line and the folded edge. That's what I'm trying to say. So when you do this, you fold them over, put them together again, and you see that you have a very neat bias. At this stage, you may need to pin the fold down, the edge of the bias down, to keep it in place. You can use your pins to do this. There you go. So you put your pin, attach your pins to the edge of the bias, bring the two folds together and attach the pin. Make sure the width is more or less the same, consistent throughout. So right now, the width of the final bias, the final width of the bias will be less than half an inch, or probably half an inch on each side. I didn't measure it, but I knew the size I wanted, so you may want to measure it if you want. And the bias, if you cut it, as I said, it doesn't have to be the same for every project. Every design will determine, has its own size of bias, so you don't need to use one size for all. I'm just trimming the edge to make sure I have a consistent measurement throughout. After I finish folding the edges in, I will steam iron and curve it. Try and curve the material, put a curve in it. The curve will help me to apply the bias easily onto the fascinator base. So I just cut some of the bias off because it was too long for my project. I only have a little hat, so if you want to check out how it should look, I'm looking at the length of it. I have too much already, so I'm going to go ahead and iron and curve it a little bit. Now it's all ironed. It looks very, very nice, and it's kind of stiff because of the ironing, and I've curved it a little bit. So if you open it, you see how it looks like. I'm going to attach it to the base to cover the wire up, and also the blanket stitches, so that the fascinator will look very lovely. I'm going to start around where the closure is. If you remember, where we closed off the wire, I'm not going to put it directly on top of it, but I'm just going to go maybe half an inch to the side of the closure, because I don't want the bulk to show. I'm going to apply my pins. Be careful you don't get a needle stick. Sometimes if you are not careful, you might. But that comes that comes with millinery. When you are in a hurry and you are not careful, you might get a needle stick. So if you look at it, it's fitting perfectly because I ironed it and I curved it a little bit. So it's falling into its place very nicely. It looks very nice here. And you make sure the back and the inner part of the bias and the outer part of the bias evens out. Don't allow one side to have more material than the other. So make sure they are the same. The width is the same in and out. It's looking very nice already. So we have come to the end. We've gone round. If you look at it, it looks very beautiful. And I want to cut the excess bias, but I want it to overlap. Don't cut it directly. Just leave some room and cut, maybe 2 inches room or even 3 inches. There you go. So I have overlapped it by maybe 2.5 to 3 inches and I've cut it. I have my thread already, and this is a double thread as usual. It is knotted at the end, and this time I'm going to use invisible stitch. Please, if you don't know how to do invisible stitches, please get a seamstress or a tailor to teach you. I may not be able to teach you effectively from here, but as you can see, I just put the needle through and I'm concentrating on the edge of the bias, the edge. So you find the edge and you put it through. Now I'm going to put the needle at the same spot where it came, almost the same spot. I've secured it. Now I'm going back in again at an angle. This is not running stitches, please. It is invisible stitch. Please have somebody teach you how to do invisible stitch. I can teach you if you want in my next video just how to do invisible stitches and blanket stitches. With these stitches, it's hard for you to even see the stitch. They are very tiny at the outside and also at the inside. So it comes out at an angle. You make sure you go back in through the same spot at an angle to the back. You pull it, pull the thread through. Invisible stitch is a very painstaking job, and you need to have patience. You have to have time, patience to do this part of the project. If you don't have patience, you ruin your work. So take your time. It doesn't matter how long it takes to do it. With practice, you will improve. So take your time and do it. Make sure your stitches are perfect. It takes quite some time, a lot of time. This may take me about 20 to 30 minutes to do this small work here. And you don't need a big needle for this project. A big needle will be nice, but it will not look nice at the end of the day. The hole will be too big and you see the stitches. So you need a small needle or medium-sized needle, and take your time. You catch the very edge of the bias. You can hardly see the stitches at the front and at the back, and that's exactly what I wanted to achieve. We're gonna go all around to the very end.